would like to thank you for joining us for today's international webinar. Center for Indian and Global Studies is a forum which aims to bring together researchers, academicians, and technical experts from various studies to initiate a dialogue on various socio-economic and political issues emerging at local, national, and global level, and give insight on plausible solutions under the mentorship of Dr. Professor Bharti Chibber ma'am. Today, in association with our eminent speakers, we'll try to bring forward a discourse on climate change in the Himalayan and Bicol region, impact and adaptations. Just to share the structure of the event, after the speakers have shared their views, we will have a question hour session. If you have any question during the presentation, kindly type them in chat box. And I also request to the participants, please keep their mic and camera off during the webinar and do not write anything else in the chat box except questions if any. Now without further ado, I would like to introduce you to our convener and moderator, Professor Bharti Chibber ma'am. Professor Bharti Chibber ma'am has been teaching political science at the University of Delhi, India for more than 16 years. A meritorious scholar, she has been honored with many awards and fellowships. She did her BA Honours and MA from Lady Sri Ram College, University of Delhi, and MPhil and PhD from Jawaharlal Nehru University. India has published books and more than 100 research papers and articles in mainstream journals to her credit. Dr. Bharti Chibber ma'am's specialization include environmental, gender issues, international relations, foreign policies. She has also worked extensively with non-governmental organizations to create awareness and empower people on environmental, educational, and gender issues. Now I request Professor Bharti Chibber ma'am to moderate the session and also share her views on mentioned topic during the webinar.
Thank you, Nikhil, for that very generous introduction. I formally welcome our esteemed speakers, Mr. Sunil Casey and also Sylvester, in this international webinar on climate change. And specifically, since today we are talking about Himalayan region and the Bicol region in Philippines. So we'll be talking about impact and adaptations. What is the impact of climate change and how the countries in these two regions, they have adapted to climate change. And it's absolutely our pleasure to welcome all our audience who have joined us live via YouTube, as well as who have joined us through Google Meet. Since it's a very, very topical subject, with the kind of change in climate that we are seeing, both across the world and both in South Asia and Southeast Asia. So we thought of let's have a worldwide view rather than confining ourselves to a particular country or a particular region. But as our experts will be sharing in due course of time, and I'll also share my views a little later in the webinar after our speakers have spoken, not only we are going through a period of crisis where if we do not manage it now, it will be too late. And the repercussions will be on everyone, on human resources, on livelihood options, on biodiversity. Already we are seeing the kind of impact that climate change has on these regions, and specifically since we are talking about Hindu Kush Himalayas. Well, when we talk about Hindu Kush Himalayas, then we have seen that in recent decades, many studies have pointed out that how we are actually, the human activities are actually warming up the temperature and how the glaciers are actually melting, resulting in natural disasters. And unfortunately, all these problems that we are facing are man-made. Since I have worked a lot on South Asia, which is my area of expertise, both in terms of traditional and non-traditional security issues. However, since our program today is about world, so I'll be sharing my views little later about the worldwide issues. But coming back to the specific question of Hindu Kush Himalayas, what we have seen that the climate change, it has affected water availability, ecosystem, agriculture production, and also we have seen that it is causing floods, landslides, even debris flow. And many of these mountains across the countries, whether it's on the Indian side or our friendly neighboring country on the side of the Nepal, we actually have seen that how there is melting of ice, which is obviously due to the how the high the mountain areas are becoming warm. But when we have these melting of ice, not only it affects the availability of the drinking water, but also it enhances the level of the sea or the rivers, which not only affects the coastal cities, but also if we look at the projections, many of the countries or the coastal cities, they are actually on the verge of having being under the water in the next couple of decades or by 2100. So I think without further waiting for our okay, Paul has also joined, great. So I think I would stop here and introduce our first speaker, and I request our first speaker to share his views. And as I said, it's absolutely a pleasure to have with us Mr. Sunil Casey. Mr. Sunil Casey, he is the founder and CEO of Asian Institute of Diplomacy and International Affairs, and it is one of the very influential think tanks in Nepal. And we have seen that under his guidance and leadership, the organization not only it has flourished, but he has contributed significantly to the foreign policy and diplomacy of Nepal. And it is both in the field of strategic affairs and economic affairs. And he also provides direction and leadership to other centers, multiple centers that the association have. In fact, he shared with me a very interesting information in the morning where he's talking about fundraising and so many research projects and also outreach activities. Basically, what he's doing, he's trying to engage various stakeholders across the stream. In addition to that, he also has global interaction with various other forums like the Himalaya Forum, and also he's co-chair of Nepal Bangladesh Business Forum, Nepal Foreign Policy Conference, and Nepal India Think Tank Summit. He's also chairman at Asia Corporation Private Limited, and it is one of the emerging commercial enterprises of Kathmandu. He's also vice president at Nepal India Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and also policy advisor at EDU Intergovernmental Organization Belgium, and a visiting faculty member at Midwestern University Nepal. And it's very interesting to note that he started his career as a radio presenter at a very young age of 13, and he became the voice of Nepal's youth during the times when we saw how the Mayos party movement. And in addition to that, he also co-founded Radio Tulsipur FM, and in order to create further awareness about socio-political and economic issues in local communities. And he has gained lifetime membership at Royalty Collection Society at Nepal. And this is an organization that helps in collecting the royalties of entertainment sectors. In addition to that, he also writes very frequently on issues of trade, economy, foreign policy for newspapers and think tanks, and speak very often on these issues, in addition to writing in different media segments. And his articles, they get published in Hindustan Times, Kathmandu Post, Times of India. And another interesting thing about him is that he's also a writer. In addition to writing articles, he also composed lyrics. He has composed lyrics for a lot of songs. So that's a kind of amazing, I would say, amalgamation of academics as well as practical grassroots level of activism and writing for social media, for entertainment, poems, and songs. Welcome once again, Shri Sunil Kesi. The floor is all yours. We are all very excited to listen to your views on Hindu Kush Himalayan region and how climate change has impacted this region.
Yeah, first of all, thank you, Professor Dr. Bharti Chibber, for your kind invitation to me to speak in today's webinar, especially on the climate change and disasters. And let me greet to everyone, my co-panelists and the participants from Nepal, India, and other parts of the world, and also from the Philippines. It's you know that I do much of the activities on the economic diplomacy rather than the climate change, but I'm a keen observer on the climate change issues in Nepal. And AIDI has been also taking some of the initiatives on the climate change activities in collaboration with the government of Nepal by 2021. Without any further delay, let me say some of the words on the climate change and disasters in Nepal. Climate change has become a home problem to all countries, and it has become a serious issue to all human beings, and people are taking it as one of the sensitive issues today. But there is a multidimensional challenge with the long-term impacts, and immediate action is increasingly evident. And Nepal, being a mountainous country with many of the world's highest peaks, are highly permitting to geographical and climate disasters. Nepal is situated in the middle portion of the Hindu Kush Himalaya region. Nepal's climate is influenced by its diverse landscape with high altitude Himalayan mountains in the north, including the highest mountain, Mount Everest, and low-lying areas at elevations less than 100 meters in the south. The country's geographic regions are divided into 5 categories with a distinct climate and culture. The diversity in the climate is complemented by diversity of its multiple ecosystems, flora and fauna. A combination of rugged landscape, high relief, active tectonic process, and intense monsoon rain have made this fragile environment vulnerable to different types of hazards and disasters. Recently, government of Nepal unveiled its new foreign policy, where climate change is one of the priority area. To achieve this goal, Government of Nepal has been working on the National Adaptation Program of Action to assess funding for the most urgent and immediate adaptation needs from the least developed countries fund. The Ministry of Forest and Environment is the focal to do so in Nepal. According to the Ministry of Forest and Environment, Government of Nepal has experienced of changes in temperature. The country, with the exception of some isolated pockets, has become warmer. Data on temperature trends from 1975 to 2005 showed 0.060 degrees Celsius rise in temperature annually, whereas rainfall has significantly decreased on an average of 3.7 mm per month per decade. Under various climate change scenario for Nepal, mean annual temperatures are projected to increase between 1.3 to 3.8 degrees Celsius by the year 2060 and 1.8 to 5.8 degrees Celsius by the year 2090. Annual storm reduction is projected to be in a range of 10 to 20% across the country. According to Global Climate Risk Index, which assesses the impacts of meteorological events in relation to economic losses and human fatalities, Nepal ranks 4th in terms of climate risk, and it falls on top 20 list of all multi-hazard countries around the globe. Besides high risk of floods, landslides, drought, the country is very prone to earthquake, and it ranks 11th in terms of global risk of earthquake occurrence. Nepal is located in the Himalayan range where Tibetan and Indian plates are colliding each other. We have witnessed a massive earthquake in 2015, which almost people knows that, which killed more than 8,000 people in Nepal, and nearly 3.5 million people were left homeless. The earthquake had consequent effects on countless of things like poverty, healthcare system, food security, human trafficking, labor cost, tourism, mental health, etc. And the reconstruction activities has been carried now with the support of various international governments, with the principle led by the government of Nepal. In Nepal, climate change is responsible for often unpredictable change in the availability of seasonal water, resulting in sometimes extreme drought and forest fire in the dry season. and heavy rains causing flash floods and landslide during the monsoon time. Every year, many people lost their lives and home due to the floods and landslides. More than 70% of the Nepal's population lives in the rural areas. Agriculture being one of the major contributor to Nepal's GDP, accounting to more than 30%, and agriculture provides livelihoods for almost 70% of Nepal's population. So even a slightest change in the climate pattern can have a drastic effect on the livelihood of the Nepali people. Nepal has diverse natural beauty with tall mountains stretching through its northern border, beautiful lakes, passes, but disaster risk lurk behind this mesmerizing beauty. 20 of the 200 potentially dangerous glacial lakes are located in Nepal, and some of them are in very critical conditions. The government of Nepal has established the National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Authority (NDRMA) to look after the issue. Concerns to disaster and natural climate risk being led by its CEO, and the organization has been formed recently. So there might be the technical and other experience could be gained from the international partners like India, China, other Philippines or European countries. According to Hindu Kush Himalaya assessment report published by EMISSION in 2019, in the future, even if global warming is kept to 1.5 degrees Celsius, warming in the Hindu Kush Himalaya region will likely be at least 0.3 degrees Celsius higher in the northwest Himalaya and at least 0.6 degrees Celsius higher. So what it means to the people who are dependent to these mountains for even a minor thing, but significant, it means the glaciers will melt faster. It also means that monsoon, the rainfall patterns are likely to change in the future. We might see more heavily rainfalls followed by drought periods and unpredictable natural disasters in Nepal. There might be changes in the ecosystem and agriculture pattern in Nepal. The melting of these glaciers not only threatens Nepal or inhabitants of mountain region, but affects the millions living along the South Asian rivers and the delta basins of Bangladesh. And if this issue is not addressed properly, one-third of our glaciers will be gone. As Nepal is an agriculture-based country heavily dependent on water for irrigation, with the river systems to change in monsoon pattern or rapidly melting of these glacier lakes make an adverse impact to the livelihood of the people. I think the disasters will be more dangerous than before, enhanced by the negligence of people like deforestation. I hear the news of floods and landslides in Nepal every year in an increasing manner, and it is alarming. Nepal has large potential of producing hydropower electricity that is around 43,000 megawatt and is very keen to produce. And the neighboring countries like India and Bangladesh are quite serious to make an investment, and already India has made the investment to produce the electricity in Nepal, and Bangladesh has already placed the investment of USD 1 billion to invest in 1,500 megawatt power generation to be imported to Bangladesh. Such extensive, Nepal needs now to be very careful about the issues and the effects of the river system as well. Such extensive effects of climate change can undermine the human development and might reverse the development gains. A study conducted in 2013, Economic Assessment of Climate Change in Key Sectors, Agriculture, Hydropower, and Water-Induced Disasters, had estimated direct cost of climate variability and extreme events equivalent to 1.5 to 2% of GDP per year of that particular year. That is approximately USD 270 to 360 million per year in 2013 prices, and much higher in extreme years. In the case of hydropower, the model projected lower dry season flows and thus lower energy availability. The additional energy generation capacity needed to meet the future demand under this scenario due to climate change was estimated to at 2,800 megawatt by 2050, with an increase in cost of USD 2.6 billion for the period through to 2050. Overall, the economic cost of climate change in Nepal for these three sectors could be equivalent to 2 to 3% of current GDP per year by mid-century. In Nepal, Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli declared Nepal's ambition to achieve net zero emission by 2050. He also announced that Nepal would develop 15 gigawatt of clean hydropower, maintain 45% forest cover, and ensure that 90% of new vehicles be electric by 2030. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Nepal, was ready to host the Sagarmatha dialogue in 2019 to discuss and debate on climate change issues by inviting global partners in Kathmandu. Unfortunately, it didn't took place due to COVID-19, and I hope next year it will happen, and Nepal could be a leader in climate change campaign. And it also shows that Nepal is serious in combating the climate change issues. As you also know that the global climate change, climate advocating organization ICMOD also based in Kathmandu, Nepal, as its headquarters is in Kathmandu. So to support the Nepal government's initiative, the idea in partnership with the Asia Institute US is going to host several programs in 2021 where we are collaborating with the government of Nepal. With the theme Weathering the Storm Climate, Nepal is a regional leader in climate change mitigation and adapting during the climate crisis. I would also like to stress upon the role of regional organizations like BIMSTEC in working together for the climate change programs, and the BIMSTEC must give focus to Himalaya. And we have been hearing that China is going to build the dam in Brahmaputra River in Tibet, and the concerns were being raised by India, but still China is not sharing the information as per the needs of its neighboring countries. And if any more situation comes in the Himalaya, it ultimately affects to the Bay of Bengal region. As we are hearing that China has been developing the heavy military structure in the Tibet region, it will have a great impact in the ecology of Himalayan nations. Later, it will also create the geopolitical tensions in the region. Despite the political and geographical differences, countries like China and India has to come together to mitigate the climate change crisis in the region. Otherwise, it would have a larger impact in the human life, and the country like India has to play an effective role in terms of mobilizing the resources and technical expertise in the region and must initiate the BIMSTEC climate change program immediately. In conclusion, Nepal is one of the most vulnerable countries to climate change. Water-induced disasters and hydrometeorological extreme events such as droughts, storms, floods, landslides, soil erosion, these have induced vulnerabilities and risks to water and sanitation, food security, energy security, environmental security, economic security, and political security, healthcare, poverty, and other climate-induced hazards. Addressing these issues are very important and urgent. Once again, thank you so much, and I look forward to have more conversation with other co-panelists, and we'll be happy to answer the questions during the Q&A session. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shri Sunil Casey, for highlighting how interdependent the countries are of the region in order to mitigate the impact of severe impact of climate crisis in the Hindu Kush region, Himalayas, and also reflecting on how Nepal is dealing with the natural disasters and how it is related to other issues like human trafficking and economic and social unrest in the society. And also you highlighted how critical it is to work together in terms of BIMSTEC, and which is very important because sub-regional cooperation is the way out in order to deal with climate crisis in the region, and how also no country should take any unilateral action which affects the other countries. So thank you so much for that very comprehensive talk on the very relevant issue and highlighting on Nepal's initiatives and how Nepal is dealing with the crisis. But as you highlighted, and I completely agree with you, that it has to be transnational and it has to be sub-regional approach towards mitigating the crisis. So thanks again, and of course we'll come back to once again during the Q&A session. So I think as Mr. Sunil Casey have highlighted in terms of climate crisis that we are dealing, especially in the region. When we talk about the Hindu Kush Himalayas, well, we see that it's one of the most iconic mountains, and with almost more than 30,000 square miles of glacier ice, more than anywhere else in the world, beside, of course, the poles. And also the humans, the kind of the sustainability that it has over 20 to 40 million people who are actually dependent, or who are actually the natives in the peaks and the valleys. So that adds to the value that adds to the Himalayan ranges, and also, of course, these are important source for our rivers, whether it's Indus, whether it is the Ganga or Brahmaputra. So I think this is very, very important that it's very critical that these issues are further reflected and deliberated upon, because we already have seen, as Mr. Sunil also highlighted, that how critical it is to come together and work in terms of mitigation of the climate crisis in this area. So I think we also have similar issues in other parts of the world. So, and the approach may be different, but these are some other critical areas. Our next speaker, he'll be highlighting about the impact of climate change and what is the impact of single-use plastic on the climate change and how that can be worked on. So, as I said, approaches and may be different, but it's all part of climate change. Well, we have engineer Sylvester Rui Weber with us, and he's a registered chemical engineer and chemical technician, and he specializes in environmental management, specifically in solid waste and hazardous waste management. And he served as environmental monitoring officer for about 2 years in his home province, Elbe. And in addition to his responsibilities in terms of providing technical assistance on solid waste management, he also works as technical staff in the hazardous waste and chemical permitting section and provincial environment management unit in Elbe. And in addition to that, he also works in terms of conducting surveys, monitoring, inspection of industries and firms to ensure their compliance with environmental laws. And currently he is doing post-graduation from Bicol University, and with a degree in Master of Science in Biodiversity and Environment Management. And he's also selected as auditor of the Philippine Institute of Chemical Engineers, the Bicol chapter, for 2021. And of course, he is an environmental advocate. So welcome you, Engineer Sylvester, and you'll be speaking about how we need to get rid of the single-use plastics. So over to you. Please share your views.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Professor Baharti. It's a very, very kind introduction. Thank you very much. I guess my presentation is already on your screens. Okay. So before I start, I would like to
Yes, please go ahead.
express, yes, before I would like to express my gratitude for inviting me in this international webinar. So it is actually my pleasure to speak in front of everyone virtually, especially in the Philippines, Nepal, and India. Okay, so we will be talking tonight. It is actually around 7 in the evening here in the Philippines. So I will start my presentation by first introducing our topic, our main um, topic for tonight, which is plastic. So actually, plastic is made from crude oil and natural gas, and it is combined with chemical plasticizers for it to be hardened or softened. And also, it is combined with certain bacteria, heat, light, color, and friction. So that's why we see different kinds of plastics, different colors, and different shapes. So I know that all of us already heard about single-use plastics. So actually, single-use plastics have the same components with the plastic that I have discussed earlier. However, they are termed as single-use because they are disposable plastics. And when we say disposable plastics, these are plastics which are commonly used for plastic packaging and intended only to be used once before they are thrown away or recycled. So what are these types of plastics, or what are these kinds of plastics? So we have these grocery bags, the food packaging, the bottles, the straws, the containers, cups, and cutleries. Okay, so as you can see in the diagram, it is said that the world produces more than 400 million tons of plastics every year. So that is a very, very large volume of plastic. And 36% of which comes from the industrial sector, or the plastic packaging sector, wherein single-use materials are designed for immediate disposal. In terms of distribution of single-use plastics as produced by regions in the year 2014, we can see that only 12% of the single-use plastics are produced in Asia, in the Pacific, wherein our countries belong. So you can also notice that most of the single-use plastics are produced in countries or regions wherein they have higher income. For example, we have North America and the Northeast Asia. So that is because they are using more plastics than us. So they are using it for daily purposes and as well as economic purposes. So from this graph, it shows about the global primary plastic waste generation from 1950 to 2015. We can see an ongoing increase in plastic waste generation over the last 60 years. So from 1950 to the year 2010, the plastics has become popular to every one of us worldwide. So we cannot deny the fact that plastics made our lives easier, and we become really dependent on the use of it. And it was in the year 2015, based from the source that I gathered, that we picked on a 300 million tons of plastic waste. So where does the problem came from, or where does the problem lies? So as I have said earlier, the use of plastic is not bad because we have become very dependent on it, and it really, really made our lives easier. So from the day that we wake up until the night that we return to our beds, we use plastics. So the problem comes in when we have this so-called improper waste management or mismanagement of waste, specifically of plastics. So that leads to what we call as plastic pollution. So you may wonder, where does our plastic waste go? So according to the United Nations, only 9% of these plastics are being recycled, and only 12% is being incinerated, while the rest, which is about 79%, is accumulated in landfill and dumps or littered in the environment. So this 79% includes the so-called single-use plastics. So that is very, very alarming because it poses risk as well as destruction to our environment. So let me give you a specific example. I mean, the status of plastic pollution here in the Philippines, in our own country. So for the information of everyone, the Philippines is very active when it comes to the celebration of the International Coastal Cleanup, which is celebrated worldwide during the month of September. And I will be presenting to you some of the data that they have gathered from the last year. So here are the top 10 items that were collected during the cleanup drives on the coastal areas, in the steros, the rivers, and other water bodies during the International Cleanup celebration. So as we can see on the list, rank 1, we have the food wrappers. So the numbers are in pieces. So we also have in rank 3 the plastic bottle cups. We also have in number 4 the plastic beverage bottles. We have the straws, stirrers. On rank 6, we have the other plastic bags. Number 7, we have this takeout or takeaway containers, which are composed of plastics or made of plastic. We have also the grocery bags and other plastic foam or packaging. So to say it easily, or how we can say is that the plastic really is one of the problems here in the Philippines when it comes to solid waste. And I guess it is also the problem not only in our country, but also other countries around the world. So why not choose plastic? So how do we say no to plastics? I will give you some of the reasons why we should say no to plastic. So number one, plastics are harmful to health, but not all plastics. So we have these kinds of plastics that contains carcinogens. So plastics are labeled depending on. Okay, so excuse me for a while. Okay, so I'm very sorry. My Shih Tzu got, I guess, I need to feed him first. Okay, so let me continue my presentation. So we have the so-called resin identification numbers on the plastics that we use. So you can see this symbol um, in a triangular form in three arrows. So those that are labeled with 1, 3, and 6 contains carcinogens. So number one are plastics made of polyethylene. So for example, we have these plastic bottles, the PET bottles. Number three, we have those plastics made of polyvinyl chloride. And number six, those plastics made of polystyrene or styro. So the next reason why we should say no to plastic is that it takes 500 to 1,000 years for it to degrade. So it has a very, very long lifespan compared to anything else in this world. So next reason is that 10% of the plastic we use yearly end up in the ocean. So that is equivalent to 700 billion plastic bottles. Imagine that. And because of that, 44% of all seabird species, 22% of cetaceans, and all sea turtle species in the growing list of fish species have been documented with plastic in or around their bodies. So let me share to you one of the news that we had in 2019, wherein a whale was found dead in a coastal valley here in the Philippines. And when they opened the animal, so the whale, they see a very huge amount of plastics ingested by the poor whale. And that is actually very sad because those we call as microplastics, as well as the plastics that we dispose intentionally on the oceans, cause the death of our marine animals. So 1 million seabirds and 100,000 marine mammals are killed annually from plastic in our ocean. And we have this island in the middle of the North Pacific, which we call as the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, which is mostly composed of plastic. So that is actually an island of plastic, which is the size of India, Europe, and Mexico combined. And of course, when we are lazy in disposing our garbage plastics properly, and it is such an eyesore to all of us, and we need to get rid of it instantly, we tend to burn it. So burning of these plastics cause harm to our ozone layer. So those are the reasons why we should get rid of plastics. So now the question is, what can we do to reduce our plastic waste? So we can see on the left side of your screens the hierarchy of waste management from the most preferred down to the least preferred. So from the top, we can see that we should be preventing the use of plastic through minimization, through the principle of reuse, recycle, and other recovery, including energy recovery, landfill, and so on. So how will we do it? So first is we need to intensify community awareness and anti-plastic or single-use plastic campaigns. So in this era, in this time wherein every one of us is very immersed on social media, that is actually a great platform for every one of us to be the voice of banning the use of single use plastics, and as well take the opportunity to amplify voices of those um, private groups that aims to eradicate the use of plastics. So as we intensify this community awareness, let us not forget to walk our talk. So that means um, while doing this community awareness, there should be a solid outcome. So in our case here in the Bicol region, as well as in the other places in our countries, some of our leaders really made sure that we have this so-called anti-single-use plastics through an ordinance. So those on the list are some of the cities and municipalities implementing this anti-single-use plastic ordinance. So we have here from the Sorsogon province, several municipalities, as well as some of the municipalities and cities in my home province, the Albay. Okay. So the next thing is that we say no to plastic straws. So how will we do that? So as much as possible, we get rid of using straws when drinking. So if we cannot do that, at least we choose to use these eco-friendly straws made of bamboo, as well as straws made of papers. So compared with the conventional plastic straws, these materials degrade faster compared to plastic. So that this is more eco-friendly. Next is that we say no to plastic bottles. Instead, we choose to use these reusable tumblers or eco tumblers. Of course, we can use it for several times. Just don't forget to wash it properly. Okay. So next is that we say no to plastic bags. So especially when we are doing our groceries, when we are doing our shoppings, we say no to plastic bags. Instead, we choose to use the so-called eco bags made of textiles as well as biodegradable materials. So here locally in Bicol region, specifically in the local government unit of Donsol in the province of Sorsogon, they are using this bakyong. So bakyong is a native material here that can be found in the Bicol region. It is actually made of rattan. So it is actually stronger than those commercial plastics that we use. And this is more eco-friendly because it is biodegradable. Next is that we cut our use of cutleries. So instead, we use our metal spoons, then wash it properly. Because just, for example, drinking one straw, just one drinking straw, just one plastic cup, just one plastic bag. But there are about 7.6 billion people in our planet. So imagine 7.6 billion people will use one of these materials and they will dispose it on the oceans. So that would cause a really, really big problem, especially to our marine ecosystem. And most importantly, we have this so-called behavioral change. So the change should start from us. So we should stop our hobby of being so dependent with the use of plastics. Instead, we start from being eco-friendly by patronizing those materials that does not employ the use of plastic or single-use plastics. Okay, so here in the Philippines, we have this law. We have this Republic Act 9003, also known as the Ecological Solid Waste Management Act of 2000, wherein it is mandated to have this segregation at source under Section 21 and segregated collection under Section 24. So why is this necessary? So if you want to get rid of plastics, if you want to manage your waste properly, and you want to use it or to employ the reuse or the principle of recycling, first is that you need to know how to segregate. Okay, so you need to know first how to classify your waste for it to be easier in your part to identify which items or which waste can be reused or recycled. So under section 22, we have these containers which shall be properly marked or identified for on-site collection. So we have this compostable or the biodegradable. We have this non-recyclable or the residual. We have these recyclables and also the special waste. So in other countries, they have more classifications for waste. But here in our country, we have at least 4 classifications for these types of waste. Okay, so before I end my short presentation, let me share to you some of the alternative technologies and practices that is being done in our region. Okay, so here in a small municipality in the province of Albay, they are incorporating these shredded plastics into concrete to make the so-called eco bricks. So they call it eco brick project. So they use these eco bricks as pavements on their gardens. And also that program or project is also replicated in a neighboring municipality in the province of Albay, which is Jubilar. Okay, so another version of the so-called eco bricks. So as you can see in the picture, we have these PET bottles stuffed with shredded plastics, and they use it in designing their gardens, in making plots for their gardens, which is a really, really eco-friendly way of doing so. So by the way, that is in the city of Ligao, still in the province of Albay. So in the province of Camarines Norte, they are also having that Eco Bricks project. And this Basura to Rice program. So this is actually a waste to rice program in the municipality of Jose Panganiban in the province of Camarines Norte, wherein those PET bottles stuffed with plastics is being exchanged for rice. Okay. So in the province of Sorsogon, in Bulan specifically, they have these recycled bags made from used tarpaulins, and also the Basura sa Bote project. So in the municipality of Bulan, they are also replicating this project. The PET bottles is stuffed with shredded plastics, and they exchange it for school supplies. So another alternative technology is that we have this plastic to fuel conversion facility in the municipality of Santa Magdalena in the province of Sorsogon. So they have this technology wherein the plastic bags specifically is being converted into bunker fuel. So actually this product, the bunker fuel, is still subjected for some tests and laboratory analysis. But some, according to the municipality of Santa Magdalena, they are using this fuel or bunker oil in lighting their lamps. So another project is we have this Basura Palit Gamit Eskwela program. So just like the other municipality that I have presented a while ago, they exchange these plastics to bags or other school supplies. And here in the municipality of Donsol, they have a different purpose for that eco brick. So instead of exchanging it to some useful materials, they actually use it as reinforcement in making benches. So they call it eco bench, as well as plant box made of eco bricks. So actually, we have a lot of ways to get rid of single-use plastics. And my presentation reminds us that we really can do better. If we want to have, if we want to conserve our environment and make plastics not one of our problems, the change should start from every one of us. So we just need to be responsible.
That's the end of the webinar. So next we have Paul with us, Engineer Paul. Well, he's a chemical engineer and he's working for the past 5 years, practicing chemical engineering and in the field of water treatment, technical assistance to solid waste management in his home province of LB. And he also takes care of compliance monitoring of industries and firms on environmental laws as mandated by the Environmental Management Bureau. And he's currently taking his master's degree on Master of Science in Biodiversity and Environmental Management, and online courses on global environmental ethics. He's also chapter secretary of the Philippine Institute of Chemical Engineers, Bicol chapter. And again, he also believes in creating awareness on the environmental issues. So Paul will be sharing with us today his views on impacts of improper solid waste management in Bicol and the Philippines region. So over to you, Paul.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Barty, for that introduction. So let me share my screen. Okay, so is my presentation visible? So if
Yes,
that's
go
the
ahead.
case,
Go ahead,
let me.
Paul.
Okay, so let me start my presentation. So So I'm going to talk about the impacts of improper waste management. So as you can see, the environment has provided us a lot of resources that we use in our daily lives. Like we have the energy, drinking water, we get energy and fuel, we get food and medicine, and etc. So we get all these resources from the environment. However, we have been living in this kind of situation that we call the linear economy, wherein we take the resources, we make products, and the waste are disposed. So we just keep on extracting the materials from the environment, and everything is just goes to waste afterwards. So that is the linear economy, and that is the current setup here in our world right now. However, this linear economy cause some threatening impacts in our planet. So when these threatening impacts, when the environment is abused, one of these impacts that we can get is what we call the disaster. So there, the disaster. So according to Merriam-Webster, that is the definition of a disaster. So it's a sudden calamitous event bringing great damage, loss, or destruction. So um, disaster is not only limited to properties, but also loss of life is also considered a disaster as well. So here are the classifications of impacts caused by improper waste management. So we have the land, water, air, and climate change and ozone depletion, which we'll be discussing one by one. So first, we have the brown environment. So inadequate solid waste management generates dump sites. So here in the picture, you can see is the estrutural dump site in Brasilia, Brazil. So it is the largest municipal dump site in the world. So that is around 136 hectare. So it's so big, right? So there. Then, of course, some dump sites tend to be mountainous. So when there are calamities like heavy rain, earthquakes, sometimes trash slide occur. And here in the Philippines, we have this Payatas tragedy, which happened in Quezon City last July 2000, wherein hundreds of families were affected and lives were lost due to that trash slide. Because communities residing near the borders of the dump sites are, of course, exposed to this kind of risks. So we also have leachate. So leachate is the water that collects contaminants as it trickles through waste. So this is the water that we can that is usually generated in dump sites, and this is actually hazardous. And the problem with leachate is when the substance enter the surface and contaminate to the groundwater, especially that most of our potable water source came from groundwater. So actually, we have this Minamata tragedy, an example wherein this factory just throw their waste in the ocean, and the metal mercury is the waste they throw contains metal mercury, which caused the Minamata disease that happened in Japan in 1956. So these waste were consumed by the fish, and of course the people consumed the fish, and that's how the waste entered the body of the community. Of course, this is very familiar with us when it rains so hard that our drainage are clogged due to waste. Flooding occurs because waste are sometimes indiscriminately thrown in public places, and it clogs the drainage system. So this picture, it happened on September 2009. Typhoon Ondoy, we call it in the Philippines. It flood Metro Manila. And just like Engineer Sylvester mentioned, we have the marine debris, which affects the marine life. So according to the study, if all of our coastal community throw their waste in the coast, there will be a total of around 35 million kilograms of day of marine debris that will be dumped in our waters. And how does this waste enters the ocean? Of course, for example, the plastic bag thrown in a store or in the city, and it enters the storm drain, then to the sea. And now the marine life were affected by it because sometimes they mistake it as food. So according to One Planet, the fifth most affected marine animal are whales and dolphins. Fourth are fishes. Third are seabirds. Second are seals, and of course, the first are the sea turtles, which is the reason why sea turtles are the face of campaign against use of plastic because they are the most affected by the marine debris because they mistake them as jellyfish, which is one of their foods. And of course, Engineer Sylvester also mentioned this, the microplastic, because plastics they degrade into smaller pieces, and until it reaches what they call the microplastics, which are 5 millimeters or smaller. So these kind of materials, they're so small that they can be consumed by fish, and of course we consume the fish. So maybe we already have these microplastics inside our body or in a system. And of course, the foul emission, because when we enter, we even in in a simple garbage can, when you open it, you smell the foul emission coming from the garbage. So it is because the composition involves the release of smelly chemicals into the air. So these are some of the chemicals and the kind of foul emission that they emit. So very famous hydrogen sulfide, they smell like rotten eggs, and so on. Another is particulate matter. So when we burn plastics, particulate matter from waste combustors includes inorganic ash present in the waste, and they just they just spread in the ambient air. So that is the particulate matter that we get from burning plastics. And of course, the greenhouse effect, because some of the waste plastic that we burn, they produce greenhouse gases, which causes the greenhouse effect. So this is the emission data of the Philippines from Climate Watch, and according to the year 2016, the emission that we gathered from the waste sector is around 13.31 metric tons of carbon dioxide emission. So that is actually the fourth largest sector in the total carbon emission generated by the Philippines. And what's sad about this situation is that the trend is increasing. So every year, the carbon emission that we get from the waste sector is increasing every year. So we must do something about it, of course, by reducing our generation of waste. And of course, some of the waste that are burned produces ozone depleting substances, which causes the ozone layer depletion. And eventually it will lead to global warming. So according to NASA, there is already a 1.8 degree Fahrenheit increase since 1880, and there is already around 13.2% of Arctic ice decrease, and around 413 gigatons per year of ice sheets are also melted, which is affecting the lives of the ecosystem of the animals that are in the Arctic and Antarctic region. And of course, when there are lots of waste in the community, in the place, it becomes a home for pests. And we all know that pests, they also lead to some diseases that which affects the health of the community. So how can we reduce these impacts? Of course, knowledge is power. So attending this kind of webinars, it is important because we're going to have an idea on how to reduce or to get rid of our plastic, just like Engineer Sylvester has discussed. And of course, we need also the environmental responsibility. So as you can see the picture here in the presentation on the on the right side, this is the Pasig River.
Have a couple of questions here. We'll start with Sunil Casey, Mr. Sunil Casey. We have a question for you, Mr. Sunil Casey, from one of our audience. She asked that how do people manage excessive flooding in Nepal? So, what are the basically she wants to ask, what are the steps have you taken in order to manage when you have flooding, excessive pouring, excessive raining? Then how do you manage flooding? Mr. Sunil, I think you're on mute. You have to unmute yourself. Yeah.
So thank you so much for asking the relevant questions. And the flood happens basically in the eastern part of Nepal, and that is nearby the Kosi barrage. That also connects to the the northern India also. Basically, like for this flood, and the disaster management purpose, like just recently, the government has established a special vehicle called National Disaster Risk and Reduction Management Authority. But previously, the Nepali army was, assisting into it, and basically they were using this Mi-17 helicopters for the rescue purposes in those affected areas, and that was only the, I think, the services which army was providing through the helicopter services. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Sunil Casey. Well, we have another question for Mr. Paul. One of our audience, she wants to know that in terms of solid waste management, how different it is from the hazardous waste management. I think she wants to know a very basic question: the difference between solid waste management and hazardous waste management.
Okay, so thank you for that question. Actually, hazardous waste management needs more tedious management because from the word itself, they are hazardous. They cause more hazardous effect in the community, especially in the health. So there is actually different types of management of hazardous waste, which is kind of different from the typical solid waste management that we get from our house. So example of these are, for example, the needles or from the injections that we get from the hospitals. There is a different way of storing them compared to other solid waste management from the house that we just put it on some typical trash cans. Sometimes put it in sandbags like that. So that there is actually a more tedious management for the hazardous waste management, for the hazardous waste rather. So that's it.
Thank you, Paul. We have another question for Sylvester. Well, Sylvester, one of our audience, he wants to know that when you talk about single-use plastic ban, then how would you rate Philippines in terms of actual implementation of single-use plastic ban?
Well, when we speak of the implementation as well as the enforcement of single-use plastic in relation with solid waste management in the Philippines, well, I could not speak for the whole country per se, but I can say that here in the Bicol region, especially in the provinces of Albay and Sorsogon, I will rate them from 1 to 5, 5 being the highest. I can say that they are around 4 to 4.5. Okay, so, well, it couldn't be perfect, but we are trying. We are trying to implement it in the best way that we can.
Thank you, Sylvester. Well, we have another question, rather two questions for you, Sunil Casey. I'll just club these two questions together. Well, our audience, basically, they want to know, one is, what is the change in terms of climate change during the times of pandemic? And the second question is, do you believe that the community has become wiser in order to deal with climate change? So one, any change during the pandemic? And second, the community, for example, the Hindu Kush or the Himalayan region area people, have they become more wiser in terms of dealing with the climate change?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. I know, like during the pandemic time, like the people basically like we were like inside the home, and previously like we were not seeing the mountains very clearly from Kathmandu, right? But during the pandemic time, like we're like seeing the mountains very closely, and the weather was truly clear, and people were taking the pictures from their home, and they were posting on Twitter, and even it was like a big news on the local newspaper as well as the United Nations posted that posted the mountain, the Mount Everest pictures which they got up from Kathmandu. So it was really like clear weather. So it was very good. Like during the pandemic time, I think that also detected the pollution in Kathmandu. And I think like these days, people in Nepal, basically in the city areas, they are quite concerned about the climate change issues, and they have been like focus much more into the renewable energy. Like they prefer to use solar power, and other facilities near their home town as well. So people are quite concerned, and they think that they are trying to get by themselves educated on the climate change issues, and they are like planting the trees in the city areas, and even in the village areas they have been doing so. And I'll tell you one story that the people who are who migrated from village to town these days, most of the people, like when Friday comes, they try to go to village area, and they don't want to stay in the town. That is another interesting facts. And people wish to stay in the hill areas than the town areas. So this is very interesting facts of the Nepalese society, basically telling to you. Yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you. I mean, that was an amazing answer, and especially the anecdote that you shared with us. So that's wonderful. Okay, there's one interesting question from me, from one of our audience. They want to know that, ma'am, how can we ask youth to get involved with the activities? Because youth today cannot live without AC. So how can we tell them to actually work for climate change? Okay, that's an interesting question. Well, thank you, dear. I would say, dear, that we need to, all of us need to work together. And it is not only the work of the government, both national and international level or international organizations. It's also an effort by all the stakeholders, which I was planning to share during my slide, but probably next time, of course, I'll do that. Very interesting things that I collected and wanted to share with you with my lot of experience, but we'll do that next time. So basically different stakeholders, academia, students, and different community people, researchers, and people like Mr. Sunil Casey, who have been working in terms of bringing investors together. So it's work of everyone. So you need to work at different levels: individual level, local level, national level, and the international level. So when it comes to individual, then let us think that what is our contribution to society in terms of mitigation of the climate change? Are we walking to our school or college, or are we taking a car? So that's one question you need to ask. The second can be, of course, as you also mentioned, about the use of ACs. And it's not only about ACs. There's so many other things that as a student you can do in terms of creating awareness drives in your neighborhood, in your college, in your other areas, in your community. Also in terms of ensuring that whatever waste we generate is actually segregated. Also in terms of bringing people together, in terms of kind of a movement, because it starts with one person, but then a lot of other people get involved, and then it becomes a kind of a campaign. So as a student, there's so many things that you can do. And I think there's one final question, and I'll take it to all our panelists, and we'll start it the other way around this time. Paul, this is something that I'll be asking to all my panelists. So this is a question that how do you convince your family and friends to work towards mitigation of climate change? So basically one advice that you'll give to your family and friends and everyone else also in the community to work towards climate change, how to work towards climate change, mitigation of climate change. That's one advice. Yeah, Paul, will start with you.
Okay, so that is a key Actually, a good question. So I think the best way for to engage a community to more sustainable development and management for the climate change. First, you need to know the setup or the situation of the community. What are the how do they practice these activities that can lead to climate change mitigation, and how can you improve it? How can you empower them to practice this more? So I think that is a good thing that you need to understand. And of course, you need to be you need to practice what you preach. You have to be an example to them. You need to show them that this is possible, that they can do it even in their homes. They can also influence this through example, like these kinds of webinars. We can just share what we know to them so that they'll have an idea on how to mitigate climate change. So that's it.
Okay, Sylvester, the same question. Your advice to your family and friends to work towards mitigation of climate change?
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Bharti. So that was actually a very good question. So for me to let my family be involved in mitigating climate change, first of all, we need to educate ourselves, and we should know what we are really facing right now. We should know what the problem really is, so that we can be able to share it to our families. Because if they don't know what climate change is, what the impacts it has, well, they won't know what the actions should be. So you should first be educated, and of course set an example. So how do you mitigate it? There's a lot of way. So you just need to be proactive, and of course choose to always be better, and always choose to protect our environment. That will be all.
Thank you, Sylvester. Same question to you, Sunil Casey. One advice to your family and friends,
Yeah.
how to lessen the impact of climate change.
Yeah. Thank you so much. It's very a very good question. Right. I think like I would tell them like first happiness is the final destination, and if you want to be happy, so that like I would tell them that try to mitigate the climate change, and I would try to educate them, and I would ask them that to set an example at the home first, then try to tell the similar kind of things, and try to convince to the relatives. Then only it will go outside of the society. And I will tell you another interesting thing. What is happening in my society is that these days people are like the young people. They are very much involved in such kind of awareness campaign, and they have been purchasing electric scooters rather than these other petrol diesel scooters. So the changes has come up within the youngsters in Kathmandu. This is the changes what I have been feeling. Even my office staff, they have been using the electric scooters rather than these other motorcycles, and they are using other electric vehicles for the travel purpose, and they are like planting the trees inside the Kathmandu city within their home. So I think people are somehow trying to resolve the issues of climate change. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Mr. Sunil Casey. So I think it was an absolutely very, very topical and very, I would say, thought-provoking kind of discussion and interaction that we had today, where we had sharing of experiences from different countries, including India, Nepal, Philippines, and different regions, and specifically the Bicol region and the Hindu Kush Himalayan region, where we not only discussed, as Mr. Sunil Casey also highlighted in his presentation and during sharing of his views, and I also started initially when I spoke about the Hindu Kush region, and also as we have seen that the problem is increasing with the kind of climate change, which is man-made in terms of global warming that we are creating because of our activities. And also it's very critical that it's high time that all of us at different levels, as I just shared, whether it's individual, local, national, or international level, we come together and work towards a mitigation or adapting to the problem of the climate change so that its impact can be lessened, which is widespread, whether in terms of agriculture or human resources, livelihood options. So it's high time that we work on these issues. And as final words, I would say that it's very critical since, especially in the context of Hindu Kush region, that I would highlight. Very important 4 steps that I would be highlighting, which I was thinking of highlighting, is one, of course, the local adaptation plan of action that is being prevalent in many countries, including Nepal and as well as in India. Also, the Hindu Kush countries, Himalayan countries, including India, Nepal, and the BIMSTEC countries, they should work together, and also different institutions work together. And of course, as one of our speakers also highlighted, the webinars or the interactions like these also play a very critical part in that. Also, localization of sustainable development goals, because if you look at the sustainable development goals, they talk about climate change, they talk about mitigation of environmental disasters, and work towards sustainable development, which is very critical for our present and for our future. So its localization is very important. That means they need to be adapted to the national policies, which many countries, including Nepal and India and many other countries, are doing. And also in terms of energy, which is very critical element. For example, we are actually working, India, Nepal, of course, I can talk about because we are working in this area. Solar energy or the wind energy is the future. So it's high time that we further emphasize on this and work on these areas. And finally, I would say that it has to be an integration of mitigating climate change and also natural disaster resilience to natural disaster management. So if you work toward these together, then definitely it will make an impact on the future. So with these words, I would thank our speakers, especially Mr. Sunil Casey and our panelists from Philippines for joining us and sharing their views. Our audience have definitely benefited from it. And I would also like to thank our wonderful audience for joining us today, both on Google Meet as well as on the YouTube. And finally, my core team, my colleagues, my students, and everyone who joined today and ensure that this is a very successful event. Well, thank you, everyone. And of course, yeah, Merry Christmas to everyone. Thank you, everyone. And
Ma'am, I also want to add something. May I?
Please go ahead, Nikhil.
Ma'am, I also would like to thank you on behalf of student of organizing committee. Thank you, ma'am, for organizing such a wonderful, enlightenment, thought-provoking webinar. We have worked intensively, very hard for successful event, and we are thankful to you for making us as a part of it.
Thank you so much, Nikhil. Thank you. It's my pleasure to have this such a successful and conduct this such a wonderful webinar, host everyone. Thanks again to our audience, my colleagues, and of course our wonderful speaker. Thank you, Mr. Sunil Casey, and everyone else. We'll definitely have you back with us when we organize our next webinar very soon in the new year, perhaps on South Asia and also South Asia and Southeast Asia relations. Thank you, everyone. Thank you once again.
Yeah. Thank you. See you soon. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Bye-bye. Namaste.
Namaste.